We now come to the motion on the estimate for the Department for Work and Pensions. The debate will be opened by Alison McGovern, and I inform the House that Mr Speaker has not selected either of the amendments listed on the order paper. I call the Minister to move the motion.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Backbench Business Committee and all the members of that committee for allowing me to lead this debate today on the Department for Work and Pensions public spending estimates. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll just open this debate and in doing so explain what I think to be the purpose and principles of the Department for Work and Pensions, and where I feel that it, unfortunately, is currently failing, and what needs to happen to change that. Today is about public spending. And in fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, most people in the House will know that the Department for Work and Pensions is the largest spending department of all of the government departments. It spends around a quarter of the government's money. But I don't believe that it's really the money we should actually focus on today, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite this being the Estimates Day debate. I think that the money is really only interesting insofar as it's for something, that we spend that money for a purpose, and we carry out that purpose in accordance with our principles. Give way to my honourable friend.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. She probably, like me, noticed in the estimates there's nothing to help the women who lost out on their pensions, who were born in the early 50s. Would you not agree with me that there'll be a round of estimates coming up very shortly, and we would like to know from the Minister what they're going to do about it and include it in the Department's estimates to the Chancellor for the future budget?
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He makes a very effective point, which is one that I will come to, which is the position of the WASPy women, born in the 1950s. They dealt, Madam Deputy Speaker, with challenges in the labour market that I have never faced. They fought for the changes that my generation benefited from, and at their point of retirement, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government undermined them. And I will say why I think that is contrary to the principles on which we operate the welfare state in this country. So I thank my friend for that very appropriate intervention. But first, before the principles, the purpose. What is the purpose of all this money? This is the biggest spending department that the UK has. What is it for? It's a simple principle, Madam Deputy Speaker, and Beveridge articulated it when he wrote his report that really commenced the modern welfare state in the UK. This spending has a simple principle, and that is to smooth incomes. The idea is that we spend this money to allow people to take money from the system when their income is low and to pay in when their income is high. It's very, very simple, because if you allow people to smooth their potential for getting wages and income over their lifetime, on average, people will be richer over their lifetime than if they have to cope alone with the hard times. If you allow people to use this kind of social insurance to smooth their income, Madam Deputy Speaker, then we're all better off. We pay in when we can, we take out when we need. That's how it works. It has a very simple purpose. So how does it do that? Well, it operates, again, by some actually pretty simple principles, this money. It's a huge amount of money, but we just adhere to a very straightforward and simple principle in our welfare state, and it's one that any student of Beveridge will know all about, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that is the contributory principle. The idea being that we all pay in when we can, and we're all entitled to take out when we need. And why do I make these points about the simple purpose and the simple principles of the welfare state? Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think that very much has really changed since Beveridge's time when it comes to the fundamental way that the labour market operates and the risks that people face in their life that will make them poorer if we don't have an effective welfare state, because basically the same evils that Beveridge identified, those we're still fighting those today. And the reasons why people might find themselves without enough to get by are fundamentally the same as they were when Beveridge wrote. So the one that we will all know about is old age, and the one that my friend already mentioned. And that's why I think it has been the right thing that over the past decade, over the past 10 years, since the crash, the incomes of pensioners in our welfare state, by and large, with one notable, shameful exception, have been protected. So we've seen pensions keep pace with earnings and with the general movement of our economy. When the economy is growing, pensioners, their incomes have kept pace. We know that that uprating, that increase in spend on pensioners has protected them from the possibilities of poverty. And nobody wants to see people who've worked hard all their lives go without and struggle with poverty in their old age. Of course, there is an exception to this, which is the WASPy women. They have been, they've had that principle that they paid in, and therefore they should be able to take out in an equitable way undermined. And for the reasons that we've already mentioned, that is shameful, and I think it must be changed. I will give her.
Thank you for giving way and the way she's introducing this debate. Does she agree with me that at a time when the Conservative leadership contenders are splurging billions in spending commitments, there's not a single penny for the WASPy women, and that really shows where their priorities lie?
Alison McGovern.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my friend for his intervention. And I must say that this Conservative leadership election that we are witnessing is like the reversal of politics as I had come to know it. I had always expected that it would be Labour, my party, that would be on the defensive when it came to public spending, that we would always have to prove that we were the ones who knew how to deal with the economy in a responsible way, and that we would always be on the defensive and the Tories would always be on the attack. But those competing in the Conservative leadership election seem to want to reverse that principle. They seem to want to be ready to be accused of splashing the cash, Madam Deputy Speaker. So given that one of those candidates found nearly £10 billion ready to be spent on tax cuts, I would simply say that this debate ought not to be ever again about whether austerity was necessary, but rather a simple question of political priorities. I give way to you.
Very powerful points, many of which I agree with. I'm also concerned about some of the pledges in the leadership contest about spending of taxpayers' money. But what does she think then about the manifesto pledges that Labour committed to, £1 trillion worth of spending in her in the last manifesto?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The member asked me about the 2017 manifesto, and I would simply remind him that going into that election, prior to the publication of the manifestos, most people expected the Conservative Party to get a huge stonking great majority, and that they'd be able to push through their version of Brexit based on the quality of their manifesto as opposed to ours. And I would simply point the honourable gentleman to the facts of history, which turned out to be not at all like that. So I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
To return to the point about the WASPy women, I completely accept that we all want to make sure that people have dignity in retirement, but does she acknowledge that the government's own figures show that reversing the impact of the decision to raise the state pension age in line with rising life expectancy would cost £181 billion? Where on earth would we find that sum of money?
Yes, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman, my fellow member of the Treasury Select Committee, for that intervention. I mean, I think that's an interesting forecast, is what I would say in response to him. I do not think that dealing with the injustices would cost anything like that. But if he wishes to have that discussion, we have many, many hours in Treasury Select Committee together, and I will happily discuss his spreadsheet any time that he wishes. I will.
Before she gets to that spreadsheet. I mean, it's very, very important, the point that she's making, and that is that the budget has been much more brought into balance because of the cuts in welfare benefits, and those welfare benefit cuts have been concentrated on families with children. So in our seats, many people are now pushed to hunger and destitution for the first time ever in their experience, not because they've lost talent, ability to manage, but we, for the first time in 100 years, we are actually cutting benefits to the very poorest.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend and constituency neighbour for that intervention. He brings me back to the point that I was just about to make, which is what Beveridge might have thought of what we have done to family benefits. And the fact is that when you have children, life costs more. And Beveridge knew this in the 1930s and the 1940s. And family benefits were always designed to be a solid part of the modern welfare state that would help our country rebuild after the Second World War. And that's also, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it relies on the contributory principle. Because how on earth do we expect children to grow up into responsible adults who are able to use their talents for the benefit of our country? How on earth do we expect them to get to the point in their life where they can adequately pay back to the welfare state if their ability to learn and to grow has been undermined at the very point when they needed the welfare state to pay out for them? You take out when you need and you pay in when you can, and that goes for family benefits along with everything else. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Lady for giving way. She's making a very powerful speech, as I would expect of her. Last week, the Scottish Government introduced a new Scottish child payment, which, when delivered in full, is going to mean an extra £10 a week for over 400,000 children. And the Child Poverty Action Group have said that this is a game changer for tackling child poverty. Does she agree with me that that is the sort of proposal which the government should be implementing for the whole of the United Kingdom and which Labour themselves should commit to?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Honourable Lady will know that I believe in the pooling and sharing of resources across the United Kingdom. So if the Scottish Government has found evidence that there is something in aiding children that can work, then I will be learning the lessons. But I firmly believe that the way that the United Kingdom's welfare state pools and shares resources is the most powerful tool that we have to tackle the child poverty that I am worried about today. And that's because we know that the projections for child poverty over the next few years are a disgrace, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will see child poverty go to record highs, and if we do not take a decision and do something about it, child poverty could rise to over 5 million children by 2024. Now, I don't know about you, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I am not prepared to stand by and see the welfare state that this country has built over many years fail at that level. I am not prepared to see the contributory principle that says that we pay to people who need so that they can pay in when they can be fatally undermined by the growing wound in our country that child poverty is. So I would ask everybody in this debate to ask themselves a simple question. Based on the purpose of the welfare state, the principles by which it operates, is the DWP's current spending a success? And really, we all know the answer to this, Madam Deputy Speaker. It stares us in the face when we think about what's going on in our own constituencies and the people that we see at our surgeries. It stares us in the face when we walk into the doors of the House of Commons and we see the destitution, and when we know that a person died on our own doorstep. It stares us in the face, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we hear from the Trussell Trust that they handed out last year 1.6 million food bank parcels. And the member for Birkenhead, my friend, made the point exactly right. Do we think that there was 1.6 million incidents of fecklessness? Do we think that there was 1.6 million incidents of people being just unable, just not able to deal with their life well enough that they had to turn themselves into a food bank and to beg for help? Do we think that there was really 1.6 million incidences of error or mistake or confusion? Quite clearly not, Madam Deputy Speaker. What we have is 1.6 million incidents of injustice and unfairness.
When for giving way once again, she's been very generous. But one of the main contributions to poverty is poverty wages, and people have been driven to food banks as a result of that. A couple of months ago, I visited a food bank in my constituency. Think about it. A semi-rich city like Coventry, 22,000 people last year used the food banks. Does that not tell us a story?
Madam Deputy Speaker, and my honourable friend makes the point well. We all know that the DWP is failing because we see it every day. So why is this failure happening? Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's pretty obvious that if you look at the DWP's policies, they have radically misunderstood poverty, because their aims, their objectives in dealing with poverty are all things that are absolutely worthwhile and worthy and good to do, but are actually not really ever going to get to the root cause of poverty. Their policy paper sets out their next steps for action on poverty. They want to, help through the Troubled Families programme. They want to identify people with complex needs. They talk about addiction. They talk about education. But the problem with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that these are all factors in people's lives that are associated with poverty. Of course, you're at risk of having lower educational achievement if you grow up in poverty. Of course, we know that addiction is a problem in communities that have less wealth. But it's also possible, Madam Deputy Speaker, to do very well at school and still be poor. It is possible to be poor and not addicted to anything. It's possible to have excellent family relationships and to look after each other and be able to take care of your family and still suffer the consequences of low income, because the root cause of poverty is not all of these other things, it's not having enough money. So when my friend talks about poverty wages, he is right. And that's why we need the DWP to change course. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
And thank the honourable lady for giving way. She's making a powerful speech. But, no one would question some of the things she said. However, does she not understand that people who suffer from addiction, suffer from that terrible pain of addiction, that is the reason why those people struggle to get into work and struggle to earn and look after themselves. Addiction is a root cause of poverty. Will the honourable lady accept? Of course it is. They're ridiculous.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, because he demonstrates exactly the point that I am making. I have every sympathy and every empathy with people who suffer from addiction and from the associated mental health conditions. However, those conditions affect everyone in society. They're not solely about people who are poor. And also, there are plenty of people who just don't have enough money, who don't suffer from any of those problems. The point that I am trying to make is that the reason why the DWP is failing is because they have missed the central point, which is that the cause of poverty is not having enough money, and it is our duty in this House to do something about it. Now, action. What must change? If he really wants to argue with me, then be my guest.
I'd very much like to argue with her, because the truth is it not, that poverty is a cause, poverty is a result of some of the problems that people face in society. If you remove those problems, people are considerably less likely to be poor, because they are more likely to be able to work. I have met people who have started out in life from a very good position, who have suffered terrible heroin addiction and consequently have not been able to work. The reason those people had no money is because they suffered from heroin addiction.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me try this another way. The people that he mentioned suffering from addiction deserve our sympathy and our empathy and our solidarity, and they deserve help. But so does the kid at school who's working hard, who's got great teachers, but who goes home and sees their parents struggle. The cause of poverty is a simple thing. It is not having enough money, and it is possible for the government to have brilliant programmes in all other spheres and still fail to deal with the wound that is in our society, that means people are turning up at food banks and children are unable to not be hungry during the holidays because they haven't got a free school meal to rely on. So I simply say to the honourable gentleman, ask yourself this question. If we had dealt with every addiction problem in our country, would that necessarily solve the problem of poverty if wages were still too low and if this government was still hell-bent on taking money year after year after year out of the welfare state that is there to support that family of that child working hard at school? So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will finish now. What is it that has to change? Well, we have to reassess the contributory principle as it affects families. We have to decide that in this country we will make sure families can make ends meet. And that's why I and a number of members from this House and the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown have set out over the summer to try and establish the principles of a programme that could make ends meet. And I say that that programme must look like this. Step one. End the policies that are breaking the principle of beverages welfare state. We know what they are. It's the two-child limit. That means 800,000 families with 3 or more children who are currently receiving tax credits. Those families are at risk. And whilst the government say that the two-child policy will save them billions of pounds, we know that every child matters, every child counts for something, and that's why that policy cannot be allowed to continue, because if it does, if that policy continues, we know from all the evidence and the child poverty forecast, it will drive up poverty for children in this country where they live in a household with 3 children or more. And if anybody thinks that somehow it will help guide families as to family size if they know that the government is going to punish the 3rd children in family. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would simply say they have probably missed the fundamentals of reproduction. We do not hold children responsible for the actions of their parents, and our welfare state should not do that.
Thank you very much. I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's making a very important point extremely well. And would she agree with me that one of the unbelievable aspects of the two-child cap is that it doesn't take into account that not everyone who has 2 children and decides to have a 3rd is on benefits when they make that decision. A family's circumstances can change overnight through no fault of their own, and yet this government seeks to punish them for that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for that important point. That's the whole entire point of the welfare state at all. Your circumstances can change overnight through no fault of your own. And the idea that the government have set up this arrangement of the two-child policy because they want to sort of send some sort of political message to people about having children or not is crazy. There's absolutely no evidence that it works. The second thing that's got to change immediately is the benefits freeze for working-age people, specifically families. We know the cost to families of that 4-year freeze that people have already lived for. That should come to an end this year. But who knows? Who knows what the next Tory Prime Minister will choose to do? Who knows if they will still choose to punish families? But we know that the reality is that working-age families have not had that lock that pensioners have had. They have not had that connection between the wages going up of everybody else in society and the money that they have to support them. And it is simply, Madam Deputy Speaker, neither fair nor effective to have a welfare state that does not help families grow up with enough to get by. We are simply undermining our ability of the next generation to contribute to the welfare state when it is their turn. Secondly, we need to reappraise the welfare state and find a balanced approach of universal benefits and targeted benefits. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we haven't got time to go into the intricacies of the ways in which universal credit has failed. But we know that it has. We know that the sanctions regime has caused destitution, and we know that so many of the ways in which universal credit was supposed to make life easier for people have not turned out to be that way in practice, which is why the government are yet to deliver the universal credit rollout. We know it, they know it. But that's why, for the future, we need a range of benefits, some of which are more simple to claim, like child benefit. Child benefit is easy. If you've got a child, by and large, apart from the highest of earners, you're entitled to it. It's easy and it's straightforward, and it would be an excellent way to stop child poverty rising if we were prepared to invest in child benefit whilst we also still use targeted means-tested benefits to get money to the poorest. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need a mix of the work that the DWP does through the welfare state and through cash transfers to deal with poverty, with all of the other things that we know help families get along and help them move forward, whether that's services for early years, nursery school, or childcare and skills development so that people can move on and move up. Because we know that it's not just low pay that's a problem, it's also families being able to have enough time to build up their skills so that they can move on to the next job and get higher wages. So we need that balanced approach of universal benefits, targeted benefits, and a balanced mix of the welfare state and other services that the government can provide to help families. But in the end, Madam Deputy Speaker, my point here today is really very simple. The DWP has failed in its purpose to help people balance their incomes throughout their lives, simply because it decided that families in the UK would carry the burden of the cuts that they wanted to see to the state. It has failed to adhere to that simple beverage principle that we pay in when we can and we take out when we need. Because if we can't fund children who really need help and support, how on earth will they grow up to be able to pay in when they can? This DWP, under this Conservative government, is a failure, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's time that changed.
Order. This is a well-subscribed debate, as is the next one. I don't want to impose a formal time limit at this point, but if colleagues could be 8 minutes or less, that would be very helpful. Trudy Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow on from the Honourable Member for Wirral South. In speaking today, I wanted to commend the excellent work of my local work coaches, who I recently met at the Whitehaven Job Centre Plus in Copeland. They really are doing a tremendous job helping many hundreds of people in my constituency into work. And I think back to the time when I owned and managed my own children's day nursery. I remember speaking with women who did not want to work more than 16 hours a week because it would scupper their benefits. The benefit system was a clear disincentive to work, and that, I believe, has been one of the greatest changes with universal credit. Under the previous welfare system, people could lose over £9 of every £10 they earned, creating no financial incentive whatsoever to get up in the morning and go to work. As my business was actually looking after other people's children, I also heard from the experiences of many parents. Under universal credit, 85% of childcare costs could now be paid, regardless of how many hours a parent works, which is a huge increase in support compared to tax credits. Under the previous system, it often made no financial sense to work more than 16 hours a week. Now, under universal credit, work pays. The recent decision to remove the two-child limit since 2017 on universal credit is welcome. And when my own 4 daughters were all aged under 5, I had to combine my full-time employment with also taking care of my young girls. Today, and I'm sure as a direct result of this government's intervention, a working family with 2 children can now receive up to £13,000 a year for their childcare costs, because we have increased the available support from 70% up to 85%. And let's remember that we now have an extra 15 hours of free childcare available to working parents of 3- and 4-year-olds since September 2017, which is enabling more parents to make work pay. And particularly for women, this makes all the difference. We now have more women in the workplace than ever before. Since records began in 1971, and that really is making a significant difference to a family's take-home pay. I think one of the greatest influences on a young person seeking employment themselves is seeing their parents enthusiastically going out to work in a morning and positively speaking about their work when they return home, as I do with my own daughters, their friends and boyfriends. There are now 458,000 fewer young people out of work since 2010. That's a 50% decrease in unemployment. And welfare reform has supported the impressive growth of 1,000 jobs on average since 2010 being created every day. I will give way.
The Honourable Lady very kindly cite the evidence to support the statement that she said that the welfare reforms have actually led to the increase in employment. I have evidence to show that it's in spite of the welfare reforms that the employment has increased.
The Honourable Member for her intervention. I think earlier in my speech I explained that previously women in particular were restricting their hours to 16 hours a week because of the benefit system. In terms of the evidence, is she surely not doubting that the unemployment record is at its lowest since 1971? Universal credit is one of the most important reforms this government is making. I want to see high-quality, affordable, flexible childcare in every town and village, and I would like to hear from the Minister what steps he and his department is making in making that possible. Certainly the welfare reforms are making it a more achievable goal in my community, and I welcome this government's efforts. Thank you for the opportunity.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I think, first of all, can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Wirral South, for an absolutely excellent speech. It really is. And I think she set out what social security should be about. It's about the type of society that we want. Her key thrust of her message was, is it acceptable that we are seeing so many children living in poverty? 1 in 4 are currently growing up in poverty, 1 in 5 in persistent poverty, when we are the 5th richest country in the world. Is it at the same time, is it the sort of society that we want to grow up in, where, being the 5th richest country in the world, we also have the highest child mortality in Western Europe? And we know the causal relationship between this poverty and early childhood death. Is that acceptable? To my mind, and I'm sure there are many people from across the chamber who also believe this, but then, and that's why my question about what is the Honourable Lady's evidence, because we have to look at the evidence. There will also be issues with addiction, but are we really seriously saying that all the issues in terms of poverty relate to addiction issues? I'm afraid there is not the evidence to support that. So getting back to the point, is it acceptable? If it's not, we then need to look at the mechanisms to ensure that in a civilised society, a society we aspire to lead, that we should have the policy measures to ensure that this does not happen. I will.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is it acceptable to be in a party that has always left office with unemployment higher than when it entered, or is it acceptable to be in a party that has delivered record numbers of jobs?
Yeah, quite right.
I'll come back to the Honourable and say, is it acceptable that we have the highest level of in-work poverty, and 2/3 of our children living in poverty are from these working families? And I will throw that back at the government. Did somebody ask me to?
Thank you very much. The Honourable Lady makes the point I was just about to make, that we are in a completely unacceptable situation with 2/3 of the children who are living in poverty in this country live in households where there is at least one parent working. Is that not, would you not agree with me, that's not just a failure by the government to protect those children? That's an abject failure by this government to protect the welfare state and to have a continuing welfare state that actually works for the people who need it most.
I agree with the Honourable Lady Moore. I'm going to carry on my questions about what is acceptable, what we deem acceptable in our country or not. Is it acceptable that sick and disabled people are being isolated and excluded across our society? I believe, in addition to children, but I also believe that sick and disabled people have borne the brunt of the cuts from this government, and it shames us all. When we think that 9 out of 10 disabilities, 9 out of 10 illnesses are acquired, would we want this, not just on ourselves, but our nearest and dearest? And I'm sure the answer would be no. So what does that mean then, in terms of the policies that we have for sick and disabled people? I think many of us, as I say, on all sides of the chamber, don't feel that that's acceptable. And in addition to the need for a thriving economy, by the way, the levels of inequalities are actually stifling the growth that we need, and that's evidence-based. I can provide evidence to source that it's actually stifling growth in the economy. But we need a social security system that is there for all of us, and it should be viewed. I would like to see the social security system that we have held in the same esteem that we have for our NHS. It should be there for each and every one of us, providing dignity and security in our retirement. Should we become sick or disabled, if we fall out of work, and let's face it, with the flexibility in employment, people are going in and out of work, and it needs to be able to reflect that. But it also needs to be able to protect us from poverty, because that's what a civilised society does. Like my honourable friend said, it should be about smoothing out our incomes so we don't have to be plunged into poverty when we have these extreme events. So it's a vital weapon, having a decent social security system to tackle the poverty and inequality that is now rampant across the UK. But we know that although work and pension spending has increased since 2010, in terms of working age support, it has actually been reduced by £30 billion because of the decisions that the government has made. And we know that it's set to that the savings there are set to increase even more to £38 billion by the end of the forecast period 23-24. These figures should include the effective measures announced at the 2018 budget, but which include annual spending of £1 billion for 2023 on universal credit. And we know, unfortunately, that although some people have been benefited by universal credit, 3 million people will still be worse off under universal credit. 87%, as I mentioned in Treasury questions this morning, of all disabled people will not benefit from the budget measures and remain worse off under universal credit, alongside 640,000 self-employed households and 475,000 working lone parent households. And we've seen, as my honourable friend has very eloquently expressed, the rise and rise of food banks, increasing in-work poverty, 4 million sick and disabled people living in poverty, 330,000 more older people living in poverty. I mentioned before, in terms of the stifling effect this has on the economy, using the OBR's own model, it's shown that the independent effects of austerity has stifled economic growth by at least £100 billion in 2018-19, the equivalent of £3,600 per household. So that's my evidence to you. I mentioned the human toll when I was in work and pension questions yesterday, and I mentioned Amanda, who is pregnant, has significant mental health issues, a lone parent, and she had a UC claim closed in the final weeks of her, when she was just before she was about to deliver her child. She didn't know what this was for, but it was revealed it was because she hadn't undertaken an independent review. I'm pleased that the Minister said that he would take this up. But this, can you just imagine if that happened to you, just suddenly you had your income ripped away from you and not knowing what was happening. At the same time, you're about to have a child, how you would feel. It is simply unacceptable. We know that between 2013 and 2018, 60 disabled people a month died after their PIC claim was rejected. And there are many others that have also died after being found fit for work. A government's first duty is to keep its people safe. This includes its vulnerable citizens, and it's failing to do this. Madam Deputy Speaker, poverty and inequality are political choices. I know there are many of us who've made suggestions as to how we can tweak the current social security system, but I believe we need radical transformation. As I think my honourable friend was alluding to, we need a new social contract built on the principles of Beveridge. And that needs to be a new social contract with the British people, defining a 21st century social security system that treats its citizens with dignity and respect and protects them from poverty, destitution and even death. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sarah Newton.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate the member for Wirral South for securing this debate. It's a really important debate, and it's always a good opportunity to have the opportunity to debate the vitally important work of the DWP. The Honourable Lady set us a really good challenge, and I hope I've got this right. She was basically saying, what is the DWP for? And she well articulated the aspirations that Beveridge had in the creation of the welfare state. But I would like to say, in addition to what she said about ensuring that there is that smoothing of income, that there is a really good safety net for people in society when they need it, for people who aren't able to work, is also really about promoting the health of well-being of people in employment. And it's this part of the work of the DWP that I would like to spend some time talking about today, because it's a really important part of the work that the department undertakes that seldom gets debated in this House. And the health of the nation's worker has really never been more important. Modern society and the world of work is changing rapidly, bringing new challenges for our physical and mental health. Now, as we all spend at least a third of our lives at work, so employers have an important role to play to help workers stay healthy. Fulfilling and meaningful work can be a huge source of well-being, and having a supportive employer can make a real difference to someone grappling with a physical or mental health condition. Crucially, 4 in 5 UK workers say that support from their employer could help them recover quicker from an illness. Now, there's much that is being done by employers, but of course there is so much more that we can all do together. Now, recent research conducted by the John Lewis Partnership reveals that by working together, government and industry can unlock £38.1 billion for the UK economy by 2025 through fast access to psychological services and physiotherapy for employees grappling with a physical or mental health condition. Now, we know the main 2 reasons for people falling out of work is poor mental health or a musculoskeletal condition. The Working Well Coalition is a new and growing group of MPs, charities, employers and think tanks. Together, we are committed to do more to improve the health of the nation's workers. To achieve this, we all need to play our part. So for businesses to take a leadership role in promoting good physical and mental health at work. And I saw for myself at my time at the DWP what some of the best employers are doing in the UK, very much supported by the Health and Safety Executive. Business can be a real force for good in our society, and we want to do more to support other employers, large and small. We want to galvanise others behind the business case for action and to work in partnership with our public services to promote a healthy society. Now, government has got an important enabling role to play. to make free occupational health services for workers a non-taxable benefit in kind, to promote investment from employers. Now, currently, these services are subject to employment taxes at an effective rate of 40%. And together, government and employers need to explore and draw together practical advice on both physical and mental health to help employers, building on the existing good practice that's there. Many employers want to invest in health and well-being, but they just don't know where to start. Now, the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Local Enterprise Partnership has started a beacon project backed by £500,000 of investment from the DWP, and it was launched in Cornwall last September at the Cornwall Growth Fest, and it aims to provide business with this tailor-made support to enable them to build inclusive workforces. The Evident Agency is developing a scalable digital project which will deliver advice and ongoing support for businesses working with the Cornwall Growth Hub and other partners to provide a single point of contact for employers developing an inclusive workplace. With record levels of employment, I know many businesses in my constituency and across the country are struggling to recruit. And through this project, we want to make it easier for businesses to find the right person, as well as supporting their existing employees who may have a disability or long-term health condition. In developing a digital solution, Evident Agency have engaged with a number of local businesses through surveys and face-to-face interviews to explore how businesses respond to mental health and disability in the workplace. What is clear is that no two businesses are the same, and that a one-size-fits-all approach simply doesn't work. Navigating businesses through this range of advice and support and following through with ongoing support is key. Developing a peer-to-peer network will be part of the solution, as will the support large businesses could give to small businesses in their supply chain. So I very much welcome the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State's recent announcement to consult on new measures to help employers better support those with health conditions in work. Much needed reforms to statutory sick pay will enable it to reach those on the lowest incomes, to be more flexible, and to really offer the support that people need to help them return safely to work. And also the government's proposals to extend occupational health so that more employers are able to offer this service. And I hope the suggestions that I raised today around changing the tax system to incentivise those changes will be seriously taken into consideration as part of that consultation. Because this is the perfect opportunity to spark a revolution in workplace health and well-being. A healthy society underpins a healthy economy. And we hope that this can be the start of a new dynamic partnership between government, employers, charities, to support the physical and mental health of our 32.7 million workers, and most importantly, close the employment gap for those people with disabilities and health conditions that really want to work and play their full part in society. Surely that's a goal that everyone across this House can unite in achieving.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this opportunity to scrutinise the DWP spending, because when I sit in surgeries week after week, listen to stories of people living in poverty, struggling to survive, yet facing on top of that a continual battle with the benefit system, I found myself wondering just where nearly a quarter of all government spending is going, because it's certainly not reaching the people who need it most in my constituency. We have overpayments, underpayments, long initial waiting periods, inaccessible, complex online forms leading to uncompleted claims, lack of support with claims, and cruel disability benefits tests leading to findings consistently overturned at appeal. We've had plenty of debates about universal credit. To me, it is not working. The 5-week wait for initial payment is driving people into poverty, debt and rent arrears, and forcing them to turn to food banks to survive. We've heard already about the numbers of people using food banks. In my constituency, like every other one in the country, the figures are going up year on year at an alarming rate. And despite the government's claim that nobody will be worse off under universal credit, we know now, thanks to the IFS, that 1.9 million adults will be at least £1,000 worse off. And whilst the OBR report at the start of the year upheld the government claim that 1 million ESA households will on average receive an extra £110 a month, it also showed that exactly the same number of ESA households will lose on average £217 a month. So it's no wonder the UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Philip Alston, accused ministers of window dressing to minimise political fallout. That is damning, that is shaming. And I've spoken on many occasions about the cruel and unfair disability benefits tests that my constituents have to go through. And for what? Record numbers of people win appeals against the department. It just looks like the whole process is a stick to beat people with. As we've heard, more than 70% of personal independence payment and employment support allowance appeals will find in favour of the claimant. Like in the case of one of my constituents who was assessed 5 times in 8 years of being on an ESA, and each time, despite being found fit for work at assessments, won each time at appeal. How flawed must the assessment process be to be so consistently wrong? And how can the cost of defending 5 separate appeals be justified when the decision is the same every time? Over 16,000 appeals overturned a PIP decision in the first 3 months of this year, and nearly 3/4 of the 22,000 PIP cases went through a tribunal, also ruled against the DWP. Waiting times for a PIP appeal are coming up to close to a year now in my constituency. That's nearly a year where some of the most vulnerable people in our society are denied the financial support they need. And it gets worse. If they have a mobility vehicle, they can lose that as well. I had someone last week who could clearly not get to her job on public transport, but now faces losing her car because of a PIP assessment. I have little doubt she will win her appeal. But what consolation will that be if she loses her job in the meantime?
Will my friend give way?
Certainly will.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that when you see this poor quality decision-making, it fatally undermines the relationship between the citizen and the state and must make his constituents wonder what kind of country we live in?
I thank my honourable friend and neighbour for her intervention. I do wonder sometimes what kind of country we live in where vulnerable people feel that actually the cards are so stacked against them that it's not even worth their while appealing. And these are the people that come to see me. I don't know what happens with the people who are so beaten down by the system that they just give up. And I feel that that is what this policy has the unintended or possibly intended consequence of time after time. And we know the cost of running PIP appeals was £27 million last year for those that were successfully appealed. ESA was not included in that figure, and 74% of those claims were successful as well. And let's not forget the figures that I uncovered towards the end of last year, where it showed that the department weren't even turning up at 4 out of 5 appeal hearings. Imagine if my constituents didn't turn up to 4 out of 5 appointments with the DWP. We know what would happen. They would be sanctioned straight away. And I also hear from parents whose children are not eligible for free school meals because their household income is just a little bit too high, and they're struggling to provide their children with a school lunch because they can't afford it. Many of these families are really struggling to make ends meet. But we also now have come across an issue where parents who are actually eligible for help are not getting it due to the complicated application process and the long waiting times. In the period before the first universal credit payment is made, I have constituents who are absolutely desperate for some support, but are told that they are not eligible for free school meals. Surely we can do this in a better way and actually get eligibility for free school meals at the time the universal credit application is made, not wait till the time the first payment comes through. And I also want to talk briefly about access to benefits for people at the end of life, people who are terminally ill. The current rules for special rules for terminal illness, or SRTI, are excluding many people with terminal illnesses. I believe I'm meeting the Minister next week to discuss this. I hope we can have a constructive conversation, but I wanted to raise it again here just so that people are aware of some of the difficulties and the money and time being wasted on what I think are inappropriate and unnecessary assessments. So, only 45% of people with motor neuron disease are in receipt of personal independence payments claimed under SRTI. The majority of people in that situation are still using the standard claims route, which I feel is inappropriate for their situation. They're required to fill in a long form, attend to face-to-face assessment, and then wait weeks before the benefits are received. I'll give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I commend him for his speech. Is he aware of the Scottish Social Security Agency's plans to ensure that all medical evidence is available to those decision makers at the application stage, so that a correct decision can be taken without the need for often demeaning and demoralising, horrible assessment processes such as the one he described? And would he support my call for the UK Government to follow Scotland's lead?
I thank the member for his intervention. I think that's a very helpful suggestion. Certainly those who are by definition, facing a very short time to get these matters sorted with terminal illnesses really should be having as much of the process done at an early stage, so that these kind of difficulties can be avoided. And it is, I think, it's highly insensitive for people who've been diagnosed with what can be a devastating condition that really is going to end their life possibly within 12 months, to have to face this extra hoop jumping at a time when really they should be focusing on spending what time they have left with their loved ones. If the majority of people with motor neuron disease are awarded the enhanced rate of PIP anyway, so we need to make it easier for them to claim for SRTI instead of the standard route which many are going down at the moment. And I'm sure that there are a number of helpful suggestions that we can discuss with the Minister next week. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to say a few words on the issue of WASPy women, which my honourable friend and neighbour, the member for Wirral South, spoke so passionately and eloquently about. She rightly drew attention to this scandal because it's not going to go away. The WASPy women are there and they're growing in number. And she's right that whilst Tory leadership candidates continue to spaff cash up the wall with spending promises on tax cuts for the most well-off in society, for the big corporations and whatever else they decide when they wake up in the morning, it is absolutely damning that not one penny has been committed to the WASPy women during these leadership hustings. And it does, at the end of the day, come down to an issue of priorities. And it's clear that WASPy women are not a priority for this government, and are not going to be a priority for the new Prime Minister either. The hardship, the injustice, the erosion of the contributory principle that underpins the welfare state are clearly not a priority for this government. And it is to their shame that they continue to ignore this campaign in the face of the overwhelming evidence that a real injustice is being done here.
Simon Clarke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's a privilege to be part of today's debate, and I congratulate the Honourable Lady for securing it. It's a really important issue. We all know that the DWP goes to the heart of so many of our constituents' lives, and I welcome my friend to the front bench in his role. I know that the important work he's done with all the issues surrounding bereaved parents over the last few weeks, which I wanted to put on record now and say how much I think everyone across the House welcomes the government's new position on that. In terms of the DWP in my constituency, I've seen firsthand over the 2 years that I've been an MP the hard work and the considerable commitment and personal dedication which the staff at the Loftus Jobs Centre put in. I've seen that in the context of the redundancies at the Bolby potash mine in my constituency caused by the move from mining potash to mining polyhalite, and the way in which the emergency response team moved in, the work that they did supporting the workforce there and making sure that they got into productive and fulfilling jobs afterwards was really impressive, something which I think speaks well about the professionalism of the men and women in our job centres, many of whom sometimes I think unfairly end up being miscast as people who either don't know or don't care about the lives of the people that they help. That's certainly not my experience, and I just don't recognise the characterisation of so much of the front-facing work of the DWP, which we hear from the opposition. I tend to find it actually, if anything, unbelievably adept, graceful and kind. I will give way.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To be clear, not one thing that I said or anybody on this side said criticises the work of people who on the front line work for the DWP. It is the policies that relate to the Department for Work and Pensions of the Conservative Party that are at issue.
To come back on that point, there is, I'm afraid, I wouldn't ascribe that to her speech, but there have been speeches which I've heard in this place from Labour MPs which have come very close to blurring that line between saying that it's the policy or the person. Actually, there is sometimes a real determination to make people afraid of their experience of programmes like Universal Credit, to stoke up concerns rather than to actually point out the progress that's just been made rolling out this fundamentally important reform, which obviously originally enjoyed the support of the opposition, namely, of course, because it was the right thing to do. And this goes to the point which I really want to make in my speech today. The Honourable Lady refers absolutely rightly to the Beveridge principle of a welfare state which acts as a strong safety net to help those in need when the chips are down. That was not what we had under the last Labour government, where the cost of welfare benefits rose by some £84 billion. That's an enormous sum of money, which has to be fair to the taxpayer as well as to the recipients of those benefits themselves. Now, this is a really important issue. That balance was lost. The public knew it was lost. That was one of the reasons, among many, why we won the 2010 general election. The widespread perception that the welfare system had come astray from its moorings, that it was no longer necessarily about helping people into work or helping them to stay in work for longer, but that for too many it had allowed a lifestyle based around dependency, the trap of dependency, the trap which my honourable friend, the member for Copeland, referred to in her speech, which is to say that for too many people the logical incentive that that system was creating was not to work or not to work more hours. And there's nothing kind about that. There's nothing, if you like, moral about that. It is in fact profoundly the opposite if we have a system which doesn't indeed help people to go to the true route out of poverty, which is of course work.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the honourable gentleman is being characteristically generous with his time. Will he answer me this simple question? How does the two-child policy provide an incentive to work when it relates to the number of children that you have, when children cannot, by definition, work?
Child benefit is obviously a sensitive issue. But the point is, if you are a family not in the welfare system, say you're just above entitlement for welfare support, you have to make rational choices in your life. All families have to make rational choices in their life about the size of the family that they can afford and the choices that they want to make. And I think that lots of people do find it wrong that the system, if you like, would allow you to have any number of children, whereas those people not in the system have to make budgetary choices. Now, that's not a principle that I'm uncomfortable defending. And look, to go to the wider point, I mean, we need to go back to first principles on this, because we do end up, amidst I don't doubt the sincerely held differences which we have on this opinion and on the concerns that Labour members have about this. They have to justify the fact that under their government, in the period 2000 to 2010, 1.4 million people spent most of that period trapped on out-of-work benefits, with some receiving more than the average wage. There were 50,000 households, 50,000, which were allowed to claim benefits worth over £26,000 a year. I represent a low-wage constituency in the north of England, and I simply cannot justify a situation whereby it was the logical thing for people to stay earning that amount of benefits rather than to actually be in work, and that has profound and adverse social consequences. One final time, yes.
I'm very grateful to them. I think what we're trying to do with this debate is trying to look at where we are now. And you're right, the honourable gentleman is right. We didn't get everything wrong. But what we need to do is to look at the system now. And it is clearly not fit for purpose. The honourable gentleman, the way he was talking, sounded as though he had concerns as well around the number of children living in poverty and the number of sick and disabled people who are looking. I'm sure he wasn't suggesting that all the sick and disabled people who require support are shirkers or scroungers and that there's nothing wrong with them. I'm sure he wasn't suggesting that. So what do we do now?
And I can, of course, and she's absolutely right. Of course, look, there are lots of people who, for reasons which are totally out of their control, need our support and our compassion, and that is not something which anyone on this side of the House would argue with. Indeed, I would argue that we get more money for those people by ensuring that the system has that resource available to devote to those families and those individuals, rather than those who don't need that support and actually need to be in work. And we've seen, obviously, a record number of people come into work. We've seen record female employment. We've seen record number of people who are disabled move into work. And these are all things that we should celebrate. And just as the other side are quick to point out the problems with the system, and any system run by government, as Byzantine as the welfare system, will always throw up hard cases which need to be looked at carefully. But we also need to recognise the considerable social policy success which has been represented by helping the equivalent of the entire population of Wales, say, over 3 million people have moved into work in the course of this government's time in office. And that is a really important shift, and it's something which we don't want to see go backwards because we change the incentives in the system. And indeed, it's one of the reasons why I was so profoundly opposed to the amendments laid down by my honourable friend, the member for Beaconsfield, in this debate. I don't think it was appropriate for this debate and these estimates to be drawn into the context of the Brexit debate. I think that was something which was profoundly unwelcome. I think whatever side of the House on which you sit, we have to try and keep certain aspects of the debate separate. And actually, it'll be interesting to hear from the shadow front bench in the course of the honourable gentleman's speech what the Labour Party's position would be, indeed, on this, what it would have been had that amendment been accepted, and indeed what it would be were a future such attempt to be made. Because I do think it's important that we get on the record that there are some aspects of this debate which are simply more important than the issue of the UK's membership of the European Union or not, because in truth the two are fundamentally discrete. Thank you.
Alison Doulis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm glad to speak for the SNP in this debate because it's a very important one, an issue I've campaigned on and for some time, particularly in relation to what has been said about the two-child limit. And I will go on to that in my speech. But it's perfectly clear that the welfare state is no longer a safety net for those who need it. It's a labyrinthine maze of bureaucracy, traps and loopholes to cheat people out of ever feeling safe or supported. The safety net, Madam Deputy Speaker, is full of holes. This Chancellor, like the one before him, and no doubt the one to follow, has attempted to balance the books on the back of sick and disabled and vulnerable people, and even by the UK's own government's own flawed criteria, they have abjectly failed. The IFS said that the Chancellor's plan of running a budget surplus by the mid-2020s is no longer a sensible proposition. Public spending was as high in 2018 as it was in 2008, but what have we got to show for it? A rise in child poverty, a rise in homelessness, a rise in food bank usage. In the fifth richest country in the world, this is a shameful situation. The two-child policy alone is expected to push thousands of families into poverty by the end of this Parliament. The Child Poverty Action Group has said that if you were to intentionally design a policy to put children into poverty, you couldn't do much better than this one. The report, Every Child Counts, the impact of the two-child limit after 2 years, was issued last week with the Church of England, CPAG, Women's Aid, Turn to Us and the Refugee Council, with support also from Interlink representing the Orthodox Jewish community. And it paints a stark picture. Families forced into poverty, to debt, to borrowing money from family and friends. And I have to say, the Honourable Member for Middlesbrough, South and East Cleveland is absolutely incorrect in so many of his assertions around this policy, because it will affect families in so many different ways and it traps them. It absolutely traps them in a situation where they cannot work their way out of poverty. And they've modelled this, and I would commend this report to him. I would commend him to read all of the details in this report, because it is absolutely clear that families cannot compensate for the two-child policy through work. And they give the example of a single parent with 3 children working 16 hours a week at the national living wage, the pretendy living wage, cannot ever compensate for the loss of a child element by increasing their hours. So even if that parent incurs childcare costs from doing so, because these are never fully covered by universal credit, only if she can access free childcare by using help from family members in addition to the fee entitlement for 2 to 4 year olds can she compensate for the loss, but she still has to more than double her hours from 16 to 40 hours a week. It's also true for families who are in couples and in other things. Nobody can work their way out of the poverty caused by this. And the findings from a survey done on the two-child limit by those who are claiming is absolutely stark. The impact on those families is dreadful. and it has resulted in some cases in family breakdown as well, which ought to concern Tories who seem to like to maintain the family in all circumstances. One of the quotes from this, and I will read out some of the quotes. "I recently split from my long-term partner and father of my 4 children. When I had my children, I did not intend to be a single parent, and now that I am, I feel like I'm being penalised by the government." Another quote, "My partner became ill and unable to work due to disability, and I'm now at home having to care for him and our 4 children. Me and my partner are literally not eating at all during the day to feed the children. I'd like to see him try and justify why that is fair, because it is absolutely not." There's a percentage of respondents reporting that the 2-child limit, I will in a second, reporting that the 2-child limit has affected their ability to pay for basic living costs. 95% of those families who responded said it had affected their ability to pay for living costs. 88% for food, 88% for clothing, 71% for gas and electric, and it goes on. It's absolutely catastrophic for these families, and they cannot do anything to get out of the situation. I will give way.
Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for bringing that report to the House. Doesn't she agree that, contrary to what the member for Middlesbrough said, life is full of unforeseen and unintended occurrences, and the welfare state is simply there to help us out with all of them?
None of the families in here could really have predicted their circumstances when they had their children, and this has been acknowledged by the government, because they said if the child was born after the cut-off date in April 2017, then it would be unfair to bring that in. They've acknowledged that it's unfair for some families, but not for all families. Absolutely. And if they acknowledge it's unfair for some, they should just scrap this brutal policy for all and forever. So families, despite this, they're trying to cut back, they're trying their best to get by. One parent said, "We try our best just to make sure the children are well fed and pick up the leftovers if they leave anything, or just toast." Parents living on just toast at best. What kind of society is this that the Minister presides over? Families are not able to pay their bills. They're going into arrears, they're going into debt, which risks then going into homelessness and losing the roof over their head. They're relying on other members of their family to try and support you. One woman said, at 36 years old, you shouldn't have to rely on your mum and dad to feed their own children. They're going into debt. They're not able to pay for things because there is no spare money. They're going into debt on credit cards and going into debt with other types of lenders. And families are so far away from being able to pay for these things, it puts tremendous financial strain on those families. There's also the impact of the 2-child limit on other members of children in the family, because other children feel as though they are losing out because of their baby brother or sister. And that's really quite sad, Madam Deputy Speaker. That really gives me a lot of pain to think that children feel as though they are losing their ability to go out and have fun or live their lives or go swimming or go to anything that they want to go to because their parents were unfortunate enough to have a 3rd child. That is absolutely appalling. It affects families' mental health and well-being, as I've said. And there are lots of other impacts as well of the 2-child limit, Madam Deputy Speaker. And there is good evidence from the survey, which should concern all members in this House, regardless of their opinions on this policy, that families are choosing to abort healthy children, healthy babies, because of the 2-child limit and because they are worried about how that is going to be fair. And the member on the front bench shakes her head. That is the evidence. She should read this report and then she should do something about it. There are also issues for women who have come through refugees, come through domestic abuse, and having to claim the rape clause for a 3rd child. Now, nobody should have to fill in a form to prove they were raped just to put food on the table, Madam Deputy Speaker. That is unacceptable and a despicable policy of this government. And last year, there were 190 women who were forced to fill out that form. I don't know yet, because the figures are not yet out, how many will be affected this year, but my bet is that it will be more. And the impact of this is that is not even all the women that are likely to be eligible for it. And there's a very good and heartbreaking, actually, case study in this report about a woman called Sabrina. And the name has been changed in the report. It says Sabrina here, so that's the name that I will use. Sabrina had been experiencing abuse at the hands of her husband for almost a decade when she and her 2 young children came to a Women's Aid member refuge in England. Whilst in the refuge, she discovered she was pregnant. Sabrina wept at the news, tears of anxiety and worry about how she was going to cope financially when she eventually moved out of the refuge. Sabrina knew that because of the 2-child limit, she'd struggled to bring a 3rd baby into the world. She couldn't bear the thought of having to tell the government how the child was conceived out of abuse and fear in order to get the money she was entitled to. So she packed her family's bags and the few belongings they had and returned to the home she had shared with her abuser utterly defeated. That is not a situation that this government should be putting women in. We should be helping women out of abusive relationships, not sending them straight back to their abusers for fear of losing out. And I don't want to hear about how a form can be changed and what could happen to make that process better. It should not exist at all. It should be a universal support system for everybody, and that is why this is so fundamentally important. And I can go on, Madam Deputy Speaker, all afternoon about the injustices of this policy. I know that others want to speak, but it affects also religious minorities who can't or won't use contraception or abortion. It affects refugee families who come here, wait a long time to be processed, and then find that they are not able to reach the entitlements that they had hoped to support themselves and their families. And the impact of this policy is devastating. It disproportionately affects families who are in work already. The Minister should look at this report, look at the evidence and scrap the two-child policy and the rape clause which stands part of it immediately.
Alex Burkhardt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to have the opportunity to talk in this important estimates day debate, and I congratulate the Honourable Lady from Wirral South for securing this debate. Record and rising employment is the central fact of this government's economic record, and it's sometimes very easy to brush over the fact that we now have the highest rate of employment in this country than at any time since the early 1970s. And that is important not just on an economic level, although obviously it has wonderful economic benefits to the country, but it's also extremely important on a social level, on a personal level, in a way that it benefits families and communities, the way it gives people opportunity and optimism that they otherwise might not have. It was very much my privilege for 4 years before I came to this place, Madam Deputy Speaker, to serve as the Director of Policy at the Centre for Social Justice, which is a think tank which looks at the root causes of poverty in the UK. And this is what really lay behind the exchange that I had with the Honourable Lady from Wirral South earlier. Because, of course, one can say that the root cause of poverty is people not having enough money. Well, poverty is people not having enough money. That's true. But it's unquestionably the case that the reason why some people don't have any money is because they don't have a job in order to earn money. And the reason some people, not everybody at all, but the reason some people who are unemployed is because something has gone badly wrong in their life, and that thing needs to be corrected with the help of public services, with the support of their family, and with their own personal determination. And that is must always be an absolutely essential part of any welfare policy, and it's why it's very important that the significant changes that have been brought in the Department for Work and Pensions have been coupled to the work of the Troubled Families Programme in the Ministry for Housing and Communities and Local Government, because it's by helping people to overcome some of these root causes of poverty that we can help more people move into the workplace and so help to support themselves and their families. Now, there is also a group of people who are lucky enough and fortunate enough to come from stable homes and get a decent education and not to suffer from addiction or any such problems, who still find it difficult to make ends meet. And that's why it's extraordinarily important that any government has an economic policy which generates jobs and drives up wages. Now, something that this government has been extraordinarily successful in and has had success without parallel in is the creation of jobs. Where life has undoubtedly been harder is in the generation of higher wages. But it feels like in recent months, I think over the past 15 months, we have turned a corner on that score. And for the first time since the financial crisis in 2008, we are starting to see wages rise above inflation. Ultimately, that is excellent news for people who are moving into the jobs market. It is excellent news for people who are starting off on low salaries. So, and it must be remembered that none of this was predicted by commentators before the 2010 general election. I remember listening to a Bank of England economist forecasting that the incoming Chancellor of the Exchequer would have to deal with unemployment of over 5 million. He said that in 2009. And in 2011, he repeated that the policies of the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition would unquestionably lead to record unemployment and a massive problem in terms of social security. In terms of social security, and that simply didn't happen because of the business-friendly policies that this government adopted that increased investment, increased business growth, and saw employment rise in very many parts of this country. And I was a pleasure to sit and listen to my friend, my honourable friend from Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland just now, because I don't believe it can be an accident or a coincidence, Madam Deputy Speaker, that his constituency is not one which has traditionally had a Conservative MP. And yet, after 7 years of Conservative employment growth in his area, it elected a Conservative. After 7 years, following a major economic meltdown under the last Labour government, the Conservatives delivered the job growth in his area that Labour had been incapable of doing for the 13 years that they were in power. And we don't just see it in Middlesbrough, we see it in a whole range of seats from Mansfield to Stoke-on-Trent, a new era of Conservative representation in parts of the Midlands and parts of the North as a result of this poverty, as a result of this policy, which has helped people to find jobs and improve the lives of themselves and their families. And this is something that has been termed as the British jobs miracle, because unemployment is now at 3.8% thereabouts in the UK, whereas in the euro area it is 7.5%. Yep, happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
I don't doubt that properly paid work is the best route out of poverty, but when will his so-called jobs miracle extend to children living in poverty? Because how can he explain what is currently going on, where we see 2/3 of all children that are living in poverty do so in a working household?
The honourable gentleman raises a very good point, but as I've already made reference to, we had a long period when we had employment, but we had little or no wage increases. We have now started to come out of that period, and so I think what he will see is if wages and wage growth are maintained in the months ahead and the years ahead, as I have no doubt to believe they will be, then you will start to see the number of young people in poverty go down, because you will see that their parents have more money because they are in work and their wages are rising above inflation. I'm sure you'd accept that point.
Won't he accept, though, that while we wait, children remain in poverty? So what is his government doing? They continue to cut universal credit, which is supposed to help these families away from poverty. Why is this continue to happen? Why do they have to wait all this time for the never-never of Jam Tomorrow?
I don't believe it's correct to say that the government is taking money out of universal credit. I'm sure the honourable gentleman remembers the last budget when a considerable amount of additional money, was put into universal credit. So I think he is, perhaps, maybe slightly out of date on that score. Very happy to give way to the honourable lady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman has obviously missed the fact that working age benefits have been frozen for 4 years. That is a real terms cut. So will he just explain, in response to the honourable lady before, who explained about a single parent with 3 children who simply cannot put any more hours a day into her working life, if benefits stay frozen, how are they supposed to see their income rise and their children lifted out of poverty?
He makes a very good point about the benefits freeze, and that's something I intend to return to at the end of my remarks. And it's unquestionably the case that the benefits freeze has hit people and hit some people very hard. She is aware of why the benefits freeze was needed. The benefits freeze was needed because of the disastrous condition that her party left this country's finances in when they left office in 2010. So, if we look at the work of the DWP in playing its role in helping people back to work and helping them find, sustain and progress in work. We've seen it, if you talk to work coaches across the country, Madam Deputy Speaker, you will find that they now have the tools at their disposal, a service at their disposal, that helps them form a relationship, working relationship with the people they're seeking to help, and understanding that people who come into the job centre are effectively in work to find work, the agreement of claimant commitments between the job seeker and the job centre, and all of this creates an environment in which both the work coaches and the people they're working with can get results. And I say no one who's spoken to work coaches across the country can doubt in any way that this has been a substantial improvement. Universal credit, as it is rolled out and as it's improved, is helping to make work pay. It has overcome the terrible problems of the 16-hour cut-off that was raised by my honourable friend from Copeland. It has helped to overcome these crazy marginal tax rates that popped up at different points in the system. But obviously it's being rolled out in a test-and-learn environment. And as it is tested, so DWP has learned, and so a range of improvements have been made. And I was particularly pleased as a member of the Work and Pensions Select Committee under the chairmanship of the Honourable Member for Birkenhead, who's no longer in his place, that we managed to work with the government to see the 7 waiting days scrapped, people get their money sooner, to see advances of up to 100% on full monthly payments to claimants, to see the development of the landlord portal to make it much easier for housing benefit to be sent to landlords, and so on and so on and so on. And these are important changes that I have no doubt that there are additional beneficial changes to be made. There is further to go, much further to go. The Honourable Lady from Wirral South mentioned the benefit freeze. I very much hope that in the comprehensive spending review towards the end of this year, the benefit freeze is ended and the headroom that the Chancellor has built up is put to good use.
George. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to speak in this debate, and I thank the Honourable Member for Wirral South for bringing it so powerfully. What I want to speak to is not just the amount of money in the system, but the impact of the system, of our benefits, across the whole range, from people who are disabled, people who have children, from pensioners, from people who are unable to work. The impact of that system on, it seems to them that they are punished for being poor, they are punished for being unable to work. From the very start of making an application for benefits, the personal independence payment form is 33 pages long, often with very cryptic questions. People know that they are supposed to answer them in certain ways, but they just don't have the guidance on how to answer them. For universal credit, you have to claim online, which means that you have to have computer skills. You have to have a computer, you have to have access to broadband as well to be able to do that and to manage your claim on an ongoing basis in order to retain control over your finances and over your benefits. We've seen that a majority of people need support in order to make that claim and to be supported throughout it. But it's not just the online claim form for universal credit. It's effectively a 10-stage process of having to make a phone call, having to complete a claim form online, having to go along to your job centre, having to provide 14 bits of documentation and evidence, having to then come back again to sign your work conditionality agreement, having to log on to your journal on a mobile phone or portable device. It's a huge amount of bureaucracy for any person to have to undergo, much less somebody who's not used to IT systems, who in an area such as mine has to spend £7 each way to get a bus to the job centre, and they have to make those costs up front before they can even start claiming them back. Someone who's applying for personal independence payment needs to go for an assessment. And we've heard so much about those assessments. I particularly have, as a member of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, I heard myself from a group of women who were the survivors of sexual abuse. They were being assessed on how that abuse continued to affect them years later. They found the whole process absolutely terrifying, having to attend a cold, informal assessment centre, often a tower block in the middle of a city, but away from where public transport goes. Yes, absolutely.
Members made in Northern Ireland, we're actually seeing the rollout of the horror story that she's indicated, that the Right Honourable Member has indicated. There's been 193,000 statistics show there 193,000 applications for PIP in February of this year. 32% of those applications were turned down, and the resulting appeal of 50,000 turndowns has cost us £5 million to process. It's a disgrace.
I agree with the honourable member. It is a disgrace. And it's not just those figures for being turned down. The government signed up over a year ago to having those assessments being recorded so that quality could be improved. But we've seen no progress on that. People in my constituency who want to see a video recording of their assessment because they are so terrified from the ones that they've had to undergo before, where people who are suicidal have been asked why they didn't commit suicide and go ahead with it, are terrified of attending another assessment for disability benefits and are desperate to see it recorded. You have to phone up 3 days in advance. You have to get specific recording equipment that can record 2 sets of recordings at the same time, and that they are rare pieces of equipment these days. You have to go back to tape cassettes in order to do it. This is the guidance as of today from the DWP, and people are having to go and try and source that equipment in order to have their assessments recorded well over a year on from the government's commitment that they would make sure that was the case in every assessment where people wished for it. Not only do they have to undergo these cold, terrifying and impersonal assessments where people are concerned that they are being marked down. The Minister appears to disagree. I've heard from women who say they've been curled up on the floor crying at having to remember their sexual abuse, and assessor not even looking at them but simply repeating the question to them. So I'm sorry, but I don't accept that those assessments are personal and that they take people's circumstances into account from the accounts that I have been told about that are distressing enough to hear. But yes, the honourable gentleman is right. 32% are turned down. That's actually better than it is in this half of the country, where we've seen 46% of applications for personal independence payments from DLA being turned down. And of those people, if they go to mandatory reconsideration, then we used to have 80% targets for mandatory reconsideration being refused. I would love to hear from the Minister in his response what the current rate of refusal is for mandatory reconsiderations. But we're seeing the tribunals that people have to undergo. 74% of them are successful, but they take 48 weeks in order to take place. That's over a year from the start of the process. People absolutely terrified all the way through of losing their benefits, and in too many cases we are seeing them having to go to the job centre, having to claim universal credit if they can't access their employment support allowance anymore, and then being deemed to be fit for work. We've seen doctors being written to and told that they cannot sign people who are sick off work anymore, that the DWP will not affect their professional medical judgment because their assessors have deemed people fit for work. One of my constituents who was in such a situation, who was going through the process of appeal, was forced back into work and on the first day back suffered a heart attack and died. My constituent and his wife and family cannot get that life back, but we can seek to improve this system that does so much damage to so many people. Even if you end up getting through a tribunal, having success, then people on benefits are seeing the amount of benefits that they're on, the amount of money reduced. Under universal credit, you have to wait at least 5 weeks in order to get your first proper payment. Yes, you can get an advance of that payment, but you have to weigh up. Do you want to spend the next 12 months in debt because you're having that advance payment deducted from your already low amount of universal credit, or do you try and muddle by? And people are ending up getting into debt to family, to friends, to loan sharks, to online loan organisations. Yes, we've heard 3 million households are still worse off under universal credit. But even in spite of that, we're seeing local housing allowance only meeting 3% of market rents in many areas, including in some of my own constituency. So people are having to they're seeing a reduction in their benefit. They're having to make up their rent because local housing allowance doesn't meet it. And then over half of universal credit claimants are having deductions made from them as well. It's no wonder that people end up in poverty, and some of my constituents end up with just £20 a week in order to pay all of their bills. As if that's not enough, then people on universal credit are being hit more and more with civil penalties for being late in supplying information, for being late for an appointment, £50 each time. Answers to some parliamentary questions that I put yesterday show that nearly £400,000 worth of such penalties have been passed to debt collectors by the DWP in the last year. These are people who are already very poor. They are already suffering from having a penalty imposed upon them, and then they're having to pay debt collectors the £135 fee that they charge on top of trying to seek a £50 fee. How is this being fair to people who are poor? How is this supporting people back into work? It's no wonder that we've seen the number of people visiting food banks rising, homelessness rising, and in-work poverty rising. There is much more that I could say as chair of the all-party group on universal credit. We hear time and again the problems with the system from some fantastic advisors who are there day in, day out trying to support people. But those advisors, Citizens Advice, Derbyshire Welfare Rights, turn to us. In many cases, they have to come to us as constituency MPs to try and sort out problems that they are not empowered to sort out on people's behalf. And I'm sorry to say that my advice agents across Derbyshire are having to come to me to see if I can help constituents in other parts of the county whose MPs refuse to help them. It's not right that we are getting to that state of affairs where MPs, I'm afraid, on the other side of the House, and every one of those requests has been from Conservative constituencies, are not prepared to listen to and support their constituents who need that support built into the system. People feel absolutely powerless. It's no wonder we've seen a huge rise in debt, a huge rise in mental health difficulties, especially among young people who are growing up in poverty, growing up in families who are struggling against this system. Please, can we not just change the amount of money that goes into the system, but the whole way that people are treated, so they really are supported, empowered to live fulfilling lives? Thank you.
Merriman. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to, I think, be the last of the backbench speeches today on this very important issue in terms of the spending of the Department of Work and Pensions and its estimates. And of course, this is the department that, of the £800 billion odd pounds that are spent each year on public services, the public sector, takes a quarter of that spending. So, a vitally important department. I congratulate the Honourable Lady for Wirral South for securing this debate. I think it's been an excellent debate for us all to contribute in. And I spent a happy year sitting behind the ministers, PPSing the Department of Work and Pensions. And I was really passionate about working with that department because it's one of these departments where it really can make a difference. It's got a huge spend, but also it has a vast range of levers at its access to be able to really help people make a difference. Or, of course, if things go wrong, then we can see where people are hindered. The Honourable Member for Brentwood and Ongar, in his excellent speech, referred to a number of honourable members who'd been elected in 2017 in seats that had previously perhaps been described as the Labour heartlands. Well, I wanted to talk about one, North East Derbyshire, to add to the list, a seat that we won in 2017. And the relevance to that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that I stood in that seat in 2010 against your predecessor, Natasha Engel, excellent MP. And I spent 2.5 years there. And I remember the time about how toxic the benefits culture had become. It had become a real issue that had sort of set neighbour over neighbour. People were very concerned that they were working hard, but they saw other people who they deemed were not putting in that shift as well. Now, in times, I thought that was actually unpleasant and unfair because it's very difficult to tell who is capable of work and who is not, and neighbours aren't able to make that distinction. But I was very troubled by it, and I think I was also troubled by the statistic that showed that in the sort of years running up to 2010, there were 1.4 million people on long-term benefits of that 9 years. And in fact, there were 2.6 million on those benefits for 5 years. So we clearly had a difficulty that many people were on benefits. And the big challenge for any government coming in 2010, be that the Labour Party or the Conservatives, was to work out how we could get people off benefits where they were capable of work, give them the tools, the access, and then the ability to step into work, thus reducing the benefits bill and focusing the bill on those that really could not work, and helping and empowering those who could work to get into the job market and then get up the job market. And I think, fast forward, I think, again, my honourable friend is right in terms of the electoral assess, that has gone down incredibly well with voters. Not only the voters who actually saw people perhaps that shouldn't be on benefits, but also those very same people that wanted the help and were given the encouragement. I'll give way once because I know we're short of time.
The honourable gentleman continues to make the assertion that welfare reforms have actually driven the increase in employment. There's no evidence to support that. If you look at the evidence from the NAO, for example, it disputes that. But on his last point, in relation to the working as the route out of poverty, 4 out of 5 people, and this is JRF figure, 4 out of 5 people in low-income work will still be in low-income work 10 years later. So it's an absolute myth to say that work is a progression. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing stuff about it. Of course we should, but it isn't.
Well, look, we can argue about statistics, but I mean, try this one. Well, the honourable lady wants to throw one at me, but then won't let me actually respond with one, which I find just sort of slightly dictatorial. 2.2 million people were unemployed when we took office in 2010. That figure is now 1.4 million. So I'll give you those numbers that quite clearly have moved off unemployment benefits into work. But of course, we can argue about this all the way through. I'm not going to take any more because, to be fair to those making interventions, you've had a lot of time to speak, and I'm not going to get much of a chance myself. But what we have seen are people moving into work, and that's been a huge success. And what we've also seen, because again, listening to members on the other side, one would think that the benefits system was completely rosy. Not only have I said that there were too many people on benefits, trapped on benefits, but if you look at the tax credit system, and the attacks made on universal credit. Universal credit has been rolled out in a slow, progressive manner, and we've changed as we've gone along. Tax credits were rolled out in one big bang, overpaid by over £7 billion, and over £2 billion had to be clawed back from those who were actually the poorest. So really don't particularly want to take too many lectures on how to introduce a successful benefit system, because we've seen before how things have failed. And that's what most impressed me about the department. It has learned from these failings over previous years and tried to do things better going through. And I'm absolutely passionate about universal credit because I spend time with my Job Centre Plus and the enthusiasm that those work coaches have for it. You go into a job centre now, it's not like going into some cold, austere office where people are too scared to go in and get any help. It feels like a place, almost like a recruitment centre, to help people. There are help points there, and there are people passionate about helping people into work. And I'm really proud of this government's record, because I believe that every single government should be judged on what they've done in terms of helping people into work. And as I said before, the Labour Party has left office every single occasion with unemployment higher than when it entered. That's got to be considered a failure. This party has been able to secure 3.6 million extra jobs. We've also increased the living wage. We've taken people out of tax. We've incentivised. And then we've tried to focus on those people that need the help the most. And just in terms of all of these jobs are low paid, 70% of them are highly skilled. In terms of wages are not going up. For the 15th month in succession, wages are going up higher than inflation. The proportion of jobs that are low paid stands at the lowest level for 20 years as a result of the national living wage. So yes, more to do, but let's not knock the record that we have delivered. Now I'm going to make one suggestion, and I'm echoing the point made by the Honourable Member for Ellesmere Port and Neston. He talked about the Motor Neurone Disease Association. Him and I played football against that organisation, and I found it the most extraordinary moment. And it was incredibly touching to work and play alongside them. I then met that team, and they make a very good point, also by the Marie Curie cancer organisation as well. It can't be right that for those that have terminal illnesses, we need to test them for their disability benefits. They are reliant on a doctor saying that they will die within 6 months. Of course, GPs are not comfortable saying that. And I think the challenge for us as a government is to really listen and look at how much that's going to cost. We know that those people are going to be able to claim for benefits in the main part. So in that case, it's only just a delay whilst we wait. They have to wait, but they haven't got time. And I would like to see our government look at that. It's not just for those in the first 6 months, but also for those who have managed to survive their terminal illness for 3 years. They have to be retested as well. And I just believe measures like that are where, whilst I'm very proud of the government and what it's done in terms of putting people into work, targeting support, almost an extra million disabled into work as well. We have record levels here. We still have individual policy areas that we need to fix and do better and never rest on our laurels. Thank you.
Neil Gray.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first of all say it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman, and can I point him to, again, the Scottish Social Security Agency and the way that we propose in Scotland to treat people with terminal illness. I think you'll find that quite illuminating in his suggestions for this government. It's a pleasure to speak for the SNP in this debate, and I congratulate the honourable member from Wirral South for securing it. There have been a number of interesting speeches, not least the honourable member's herself. She set out very well the strong defence of the welfare state. She rightly contrasted the way pensioners, other than the WASPy women, have rightly been protected while others have not, a point that I'll develop later in my speech. And she also mentioned the fact that austerity is a choice, and was right to draw the 1.6 million food parcels handed out by the Trussell Trust as a stark reminder of the impoverishing failure of austerity. But best of all from her, I think, was her stout and very clear argument that income and the lack of it is the driving force behind poverty, and she was absolutely right to do so. The honourable member from Copeland was right to welcome the government cancelling the expansion of the two-child limit, but I question why she doesn't expect that policy to be scrapped in its entirety. The honourable member from Oldham East and Saddleworth, who I always enjoy listening to in these debates, she was right to ask why we don't hold the social security system in this in the UK to the same esteem as we do the NHS. I think that's something that we should all ponder, and some in the Fifth Estate should also be pondering as well. The honourable member from Truro and Falmouth gave a very thoughtful speech, but I think actually the best speech of the day was made by my honourable friend from Glasgow Central. Her speech was brilliant. Rightly contradicted the Tory rhetoric on the two-child limit, highlighting the report from CPAG, the Church of England and others from last week. And this certainly doesn't give me any pleasure. I know it doesn't give my honourable friend any pleasure to say this report proves the warnings that we made at the time absolutely correct. No mother, no parent should have to choose between poverty and an abortion, but sadly that is the stark choice that they are currently faced with through the two-child limit. The honourable member from Brentwood and Ongar is simply wrong on universal credit. The last budget made up for just half of the cuts that have been inflicted on universal credit by the 2015 budget. The honourable member from High Peak was right to highlight the non-financial problems that currently exist within universal credit and other benefits. And the honourable member from Bexhill Battle was right to point to the influence that the DWP has. Policy drives poverty. We need to remember that. But so much of this debate, sadly, has been characterised by raking over decade-old ground, and rather than addressing the issues that we face today, and I wish some more of the time that we had today would have been spent on that by some members. Madam Deputy Speaker, the estimate we have before us for the DWP spending is still driven by the policies of austerity that have ravaged the department since 2010. The estimate itself may have risen by 3%, but as the Library briefing makes clear, this is largely down to the DWP accepting greater responsibility on spending in areas that were made by other departments previously, such as tax credits from HMRC. Most people who are reliant on social security are not seeing any rise in their weekly family budgets. A point well made by the member for Ellesmere Port and Neston when he said, well, I think it was 1.9 million people worse off by £1,000 under universal credit, according to the IFS. Family incomes have been slashed thanks to the austerity agenda led by the Tory Liberal coalition and continued since 2015. Even the modest rises in the state pension leave the UK state pension still as one of the most miserly in the developed world. The reality is that thousands of people in Scotland and across the UK have been hit by the freeze in benefits, the two-child cap, cuts to disability benefits and cuts to universal credit, leading to a rise in food bank use and in-work poverty. And that is why we want the UK Government to think again on its budget for the DWP. And that is why SNP members will today vote against this estimate. We're not doing so in order to deny the funding to the DWP. We are using this as the only blunt instrument we have to protest at the way that the Department for Work and Pensions is being funded, and to protest at the way that the estimates process is scrutinised. Holyrood, of course, in Holyrood you can amend the budget when it is presented. Sadly, not so in this case. This budget allocation won't allow the DWP to remove the two-child cap, the benefit freeze or fix universal credit, and it won't allow them to mitigate the hardship suffered by 1950s-born women as their state pension age was increased without adequate notice or lead-in time. What is the real-world result of this government spending cuts to the DWP? Increased poverty and food bank use. The Trussell Trust, the largest food bank network in the UK, has reported steep rises in demand of its services year on year. In this year's report, they pointed to increased food bank use amongst working families. That should be a stark warning to us all. The Secretary of State, this Secretary of State, was the first in her role to acknowledge the long-stated link between social security cuts and increased food bank use, but little has been done by this government to put the money where it is needed and stop the cuts that are hurting the most, such as the benefit freeze and the two-child cap. Even the investment that was made in universal credit at the last budget did not even cover the cuts that were inflicted by that disgraceful budget of 2015, which cut universal credit and other social security benefits to ribbons. Of course, all of this, in the estimate we have before us, could be moot, as we are going to have a new Prime Minister, a new Chancellor, probably a new Secretary of State for the Department for Work and Pensions by the end of this month. And my question for the two remaining candidates for the Prime Minister is, what are your plans for social security? What are you going to do about child poverty? Are you going to follow the model set out last week by the Scottish Government with its Scottish Child Payment? That measure alone, which will be delivered earlier than predicted to tackle the increase in child poverty being perpetrated by this UK Government, that measure alone is predicted to lift 30,000 children out of poverty. The Child Poverty Action Group described it as a game changer in the fight to tackle child poverty. Quite the contrast from CPAG's comments about the Tories' two-child cap, of which they said you could not design a better policy to increase child poverty than this one. So whichever candidate it is who wins, we want to know if they will follow our example in putting money where it is needed, or will they continue with the pernicious cuts to social security we have seen them support since 2010. I mean, it's unlikely that the front-runner, the former Foreign Secretary, is going to have the ideological or economic space to address the problems with universal credit, as he will be spending Scottish taxpayers' money on delivering the massive tax cut which the IFS have said would primarily benefit just the top 8% of earners. Quite how the 4.5 million UK children in poverty will benefit is anyone's guess, but it's all a guessing game with this particular candidate. Indeed, yesterday I suggested it might be the Secretary of State's final outing at DWP questions. Little did I know how prophetic a statement that was. Today we found out, apparently, the Foreign Secretary wants to get rid of the DWP altogether. What an absolute farce, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also raised yesterday the issue of child poverty, and the Work and Pensions Secretary said she saw work as the best route out of poverty. I agree, but it has to be properly paid work, and evidence shows that in-work poverty is rising. And incomes matter, which is why the new Scottish Child Payment is so important. So is addressing the chronic shortage of social and affordable housing, which Scotland is leading the way on. So is getting more employers to pay the real living wage, which is where Scotland is leading the way on. These are just some of the reasons why Scotland has a lower child poverty figure than the rest of the UK. Sadly, we do have so much more to do. And the UN Special Rapporteur on Poverty and Human Rights, Philip Alison, recognised the work that is being done in Scotland to address poverty, but he also pointed to the UK social security policies as driving poverty levels in Scotland. Scottish Government, local authorities and third sector organisations doing fantastic work to alleviate poverty, but we're pushing against the tide of UK cuts. The problems need fixed here. And one of the problems is the 5-week wait built into universal credit. That waiting period is driving up indebtedness through rent arrears and commercial debt, and one way of sorting it could be to use the assessment period for the advance payment of UC proper. If there is an acceptance that people need an advance at the start of universal credit, why say that money needs paid back? People cannot be expected to live off fresh air, and they should not be expected to prolong indebtedness or financial hardship either. Make the advance the first payment of universal credit and stop the cycle of hardship. I've already mentioned the 2-child cap and the benefit freeze, which I think, are starting to realise need to get sorted. But taken together with the 5-week wait, if these were fixed, it would go a long way to stop the rise in poverty that are being projected. And in terms of treating people with dignity and respect, there is an urgent need to sort out the disability assessments and to ensure there is a do-no-harm approach. Ministers will be aware of the work being done in Scotland in setting up the new Scottish Social Security Agency, which is soon to take responsibility for PIP. One of the things we have confirmed we will do is to ensure all medical information about the applicant is available at the application stage, so as to avoid the need for the face-to-face assessments so many disabled people find demeaning and irrelevant. It is hoped that by doing so we will cut the staggering appeal rates currently seen in the UK system, as we will get the decision right the first time. The current Disabilities Minister once said from the backbenches that he was sympathetic to this idea, and I hope that he might be influential within his department now in looking to follow Scotland's lead in this particular area. The pensions landscape is also one that still needs properly mapped out. I've repeatedly raised the issues faced by the 1950s born woman. I still believe the UK ministers have an obligation to act, but we continue to get stonewalled. But there is one issue that was picked up this morning in a round table that myself and my honourable friends from Roscoe Lochaber and from Paisley had in a meeting with pension stakeholders, and that is of lost pension assets. The ABI and the Pensions Policy Institute analysed this relatively recently and found that there were 1.6 million lost pension pots, averaging £13,000 each, totalling about £20 billion that was not claimed. Most astonishing for us to find was that this was just for defined contribution schemes alone. Defined benefit schemes are obviously harder to analyse, but it is expected the total could be far in excess of the £20 billion unclaimed from DC schemes. But what I found most frustrating was that the industry has been trying very hard to return these assets to their owners, but the UK Government has not been terribly helpful in providing the necessary information to allow them to do so, so I hope that will change. Phoenix, one of the contributors today, spent 2 years researching lost pension pots and managed to reunite £13 million from over 2,300 pots. Clearly, the UK Government needs to look at what it can do to help the industry, as we're talking about substantial amounts of money. And we await the pensions bill being published, and I hope there can be serious cross-party working to advance key issues like the pensions dashboard and our idea for an independent pensions commission. But in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, what this debate has sadly shown is that while there is a general consensus on the pensions scene, sadly, with some exceptions, there is very little in other areas of social security that we agree on across this House. But the facts speak for themselves. When we invest in families, when we ensure there is proper support for them, poverty drops. Poverty is policy-driven, and right now, UK policy is impoverishing. That's why we can't support these estimates this evening.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Airdrie and Wirral. I congratulate my honourable friend and member for Wirral South on securing this vital debate and thank the many members who have contributed today. There are sadly far too many things that members could have chosen to focus on when considering the spending approach of the Department for Work and Pensions. There is certainly no shortage of examples of delivery failure, catastrophic underfunding, or policy approaches that hit the most vulnerable the hardest, including 1950s women and citizens that are terminally ill. There is, however, as highlighted by members in this chamber today, one area where so many of this department's failures come together, a group who all too often suffer the consequences of multiple cuts and changes in policy, and that group is children. And it shames us as a society that this current government has allowed them to bear the brunt in such a shocking manner. So members have welcomed this opportunity to scrutinise the Department for Work and Pension spending, and we welcome the member for Wirral South's subject of choice, because when the future of some of our most vulnerable children is at stake, it's absolutely right that we hold this government account for its poor decisions. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's shocking that by 2022, the Department for Work and Pension spending on social security will be £36 billion less per year than in 2010. Social security has become a vehicle for cuts, a political choice that has seen 1.6 million emergency food parcels given out last year alone, and 577,000 of these parcels went to children. A political choice that has seen this government dragged through the courts on several occasions, one example being the 210,000 people who were underpaid their EMA and who will now rightfully receive, the £920 million that they are owed. The consequences, as we've heard in this chamber today, are that child poverty has increased by 500,000, taking the total to 4.1 million people, children living in poverty, and likely to rise, as the Honourable Member for Wirral South, to over 5 million children. In-work poverty is rising faster than employment. Absolute child poverty has also increased over the last year, showing the negative impact of low pay, universal credit, the 5-week wait, the 4-year freeze and the 2-child limit on family income. Madam Deputy Speaker, when poverty and food bank use are rapidly growing industries, then it suggests that tackling and preventing child poverty is clearly not a priority for this government. When tools that should be used to support people, like the Flexible Support Fund, are regularly underspent, it does beg the question, is the government even trying to support those most in need with the current tools at its disposal? And even if we were to ignore all the evidence and be generous to ministers when they say that tackling poverty is a priority, it's certainly clear that they aren't doing so with the necessary vigour or success or compassion required. Where they have applied new policies, they have failed. There have been persistent problems with personal independent payments, as highlighted by the Honourable Member and friend for Ellesmere Port and Neston, with over 70% of appeals against decisions to remove PIP being successful. All at a considerable cost to the public purse, but more importantly, detrimental to the life chances and well-being of people. The many thousands of families who budget down to the nearest pound every single week just to make sure they can feed and clothe their children, provide a roof over their heads, could certainly teach the two candidates rutting to be the next Prime Minister a thing or two about how to prioritise and manage budgets effectively. Of course, there are many families for whom all the budgeting and prioritising in the world still isn't enough to cover the costs of this government's draconian cuts to social security. Victims of this government's insistence on continuing to plough on with universal credit and freeze to the working age benefits, when all the evidence shows, as has been pointed out in the chamber today, that these cuts are causing severe hardship and poverty. As the Honourable Member for Wirral South has highlighted, poverty is poverty, and food poverty is not separate to it, but a symptom of it, a symptom of low income. It cannot be divorced from overall effect of government policy or wished away by government-supported MPs who think that a selfie at a food bank will solve these problems or absolve this government of its responsibility as the architect for austerity Britain. And we've heard much of the evidence here today from the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth that referred to a case where a pregnant woman was denied, was, in fact, I think in the honourable member's word, UC was ripped away from that pregnant mother in that time of need. And the honourable member for Glasgow Central, social security is referred to, it should be a net, but it's a net which is full of holes, and certainly highlighted the immorality of the two-child limit. And, of course, the member for High Peak, who spoke about the insensitive assessments applied to the most vulnerable in our society. Madam Deputy Speaker, these stories are the real indicator of how we should view this department and this government's record on poverty and its approach to social security. A government committed to the continuation of failing poverty policies who would rather trumpet a jobs miracle that in reality for many people in real communities is nothing but a mirage. But the reality is that for most people in poverty, they are living in working households. This is a government whose approach has ensured that for thousands of people, work is not a route out of poverty, with poverty wages and insecure work. That is the damning indictment of their record and our current economic system, and it needs to change. In just 3 weeks' time, we are likely to have at least one change. The leader of the party opposite, and therefore the Prime Minister will be someone different. Perhaps the Cabinet Minister responsible for the department we are scrutinising today will be different too. However, given we've already had 6 of those in the last 3 years, that would be less remarkable. If the government had shown the same willingness to change the direction as it's shown to changing ministers, we might be in a different place. But it isn't the changing of the names around the cabinet table that will make a difference, or even, as some in the media have said yesterday, scrapping the department. It's the changing of policy, the changing of attitude and the changing of approach that will make a difference. So why not leave a legacy, Minister, and heed the clarion call from organisations such as the Child Poverty Action Group and the many voices in this chamber today? And will the Minister commit to end the 5-week wait for universal credit, remove the 2-child limit and the benefit cap, scrap the benefits freeze, pay upfront childcare costs, and put a stop to punitive sanctions and work capability assessments? Or better still, let's have a general election and let the people decide. Thank you.
Minister, will...
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to respond to this debate, a vital discussion on how this department supports those 22 million people that rely on our services. We've had a huge number of valuable contributions to the debate today, including honourable members for Wirral South, who I congratulate for securing this debate, Copeland, Oldham East and Saddleworth, Truro and Falmouth, Ellesmere Port and Neston, Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland, Glasgow Central, Brentwood and Ongar, High Peak, Bexhill and Battle. I will, a little later in my contribution, Madam Deputy Speaker, respond to some of the key points raised. Now, I've been in ministerial post for 3 months now, and over this time, my key focus has been on supporting the most vulnerable in our society. No one in government wants to see poverty rising. While the latest households below average income statistics for 2017-18 do not reflect the £1.7 billion a year cash boost to our welfare system announced in the budget, the Secretary of State and I recognise there is more to do. We know that children in households where no one works are around 5 times more likely to be in poverty than those in households where all adults work. And we are committed to helping lone parents into a job which is flexible around their caring responsibilities. And there are now over 1.2 million lone parents in work. To support parents into work, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government spends £6 billion on childcare each year, doing so by doubling free childcare to 30 hours a week for nearly 400,000 working parents of 3- and 4-year-olds, introducing tax-free childcare worth up to £2,000 per child per year, changes to the Flexible Support Fund to help with paying upfront childcare costs. And we're clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we need to continue work in this area. And that's why the Secretary of State and I have publicly committed to tackle poverty, and in particular child poverty. As we get closer to the spending review discussions on the financial spend of the department, Ministers and I are reviewing our bids in collaboration with other departments to ensure that those who can work, do work, and those who can't are supported. And in addition, I can confirm that there are no plans to extend or maintain the benefit freeze after March 2020.
Certainly. Well, I thank the Minister for the commitments that he's just made. Will he set out as well what more the government can do to ensure that vulnerable claimants can get access to universal credit?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. We know around 20% of individuals and claimants seek help when accessing and making a claim for universal credit. That's why we introduced the Help to Claim service, working with Citizens Advice and Citizens Advice Scotland. But I am acutely aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are a number of vulnerable groups within my portfolio: care leavers, prison leavers, survivors of domestic abuse, those that are homeless or rough sleeping, that do need that extra support. And the Secretary of State and I are looking very carefully at a number of options ahead of potential spending review bids about what we can do further in that area. But he raises a very good point. So,
will the Minister also confirm that it is now always worthwhile to go to work, that it is better off in work, contrary to what we've just heard?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for that question. And yes, he's right. By removing the cliff edges, universal credit does ensure that work always pays. And that was not the case under the previous legacy system. I do need to make some progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, DWP ministers always listen and act on feedback. This is why we have recently announced ending 3-year sanctions, programmes to investigate how we can help those in work to progress, working with the Social Metrics Commission on a measurement of poverty, and no longer regularly reviewing those on PIP who have reached state pension age. In addition, I continue to work closely with charities, stakeholders and members across this House, using real-life experiences to help shape improvements to the department's work. And we have worked with the real experts, the stakeholders, including Refuge and Women's Aid, who've supported training for our work coaches to support victims of domestic abuse so they can better identify, refer and support those in need. With respect, Madam Deputy Speaker, I won't, because I think if you haven't been there for the debate, for any of the contributions to the debate, I won't take an intervention. So in terms of supporting victims of domestic abuse, we want them to be able to better identify, refer and support those in need. We worked with MHCLG on the commitment to end rough sleeping through the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy, and the Ministry of Justice to ensure prison leavers have access to welfare support from day one. Only last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State announced an extension to the UC pilot in HMP Perth and HMP Cornton Vale.
I'll thank the Minister for giving way. I'll pass on the intervention from my honourable friend from Ayrshire. Will he give separate payments to women who have suffered domestic violence?
Well, as the honourable gentleman knows, split payments are available, and I know the Scottish Government are looking at split payments by default. It is an area I'm looking at very closely indeed. It does come with huge complexities, as the Scottish Government indeed recognises themselves, and we are working very closely with the Scottish Government. The Secretary of State has done a huge amount of work in this area. You'd expect nothing less from a former Home Secretary who has done an awful lot of work around domestic abuse. So it is something that I am looking at very carefully. I am conscious of, and I'm very happy to commit to continue to working with the Scottish Government to try and find a solution to what is a very complex issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, supporting the most vulnerable in society is at the very heart of our compassionate Conservative government. And my department does exactly that. Last year, we paid 20 million citizens, more than half of all adults in this country, a huge range of social security entitlements and benefits, from state pension and cold weather payments to universal credit and disability benefits. Mr. Speaker, in total, the Department spends £190 billion a year, spending that is equivalent to the GDP of Portugal. Through our welfare reforms and our reforms to make work pay, we have got spending under control whilst ensuring that we do not trap people on welfare. Under Labour, Madam Deputy Speaker, 1.4 million people spent most of the last decade trapped on out-of-work benefits, with some receiving more than the average wage. 50,000 households were allowed to claim benefits worth over £500 a week, or over £26,000 a year, higher than the average wage at the time. We are creating a welfare system in which it pays to work, with universal credit simplifying the complex legacy benefits.
The Minister is clearly not giving way. And I apologise, the House can't hear me. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Lady has had an opportunity to contribute already to this debate. She's intervened numerous times, and as I said at the beginning, Madam Deputy Speaker, far from being frit, I will come to address a number of the key points that were raised during this debate. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are creating a welfare system in which it pays to work, with universal credit simplifying the complex legacy benefit system that thwarted opportunities to work through punitive tax rates, a cliff edge for those wanting to do more work, and mired people in debt. We are establishing job centres that help people into work, not just to sign on. Job centres where one-to-one, personalised support is provided to a claimant from their work coach, offering advice and access to services to help the vulnerable, and where staff create links with businesses to make it their personal mission to help you not into just a job, but into the right job. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not to speak of the huge wider support that this government offers. Our welfare reforms are assisting the incredible employment statistics that we see month on month. The recent labour market figures show the importance of helping people into work, and this government has created over 3.6 million more jobs since 2010, helping people out of poverty, creating aspiration and a huge sense of purpose for millions. Madam Deputy Speaker, the employment rate is at a record high, with the unemployment rate, which has halved since 2010 and has not been lower since the 1970s. As my honourable friend, the member for Bexhill and Battle, rightly said, no Labour government has ever left office with unemployment lower than when it started, meaning more people were denied the security of a regular wage. From May to July 1997 to March to May 2010, the unemployment level increased from 2.1 million to 2.5 million. There are now almost 1 million fewer workless households, giving over 600,000 more children a role model in their home who is in work. And the number of children living in workless households increased under Labour, meaning less children were living in a financially stable household with a working role model. Labour failed to help people into work so they could provide for their families, with workless households increasing between 1997 and 2010. Madam Deputy Speaker, the number of young people unemployed has almost halved since 2010. Female unemployment is at a record high, and wages are growing at their joint fastest rate in a decade. These are the reasons why our labour market is outperforming many.
Point of order. Mr. Kevin Jones.
I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I thought the purpose of a minister coming to was actually to reply to the debate. The minister's now been on his feet 10 minutes. And what he's doing is reading out his civil service brief. I know this is getting a habit amongst ministers, but I think he said he was going to refer to members of the debate. I think he should start doing it.
Order. I would have stopped the honourable gentleman a few seconds earlier. The House will forgive me for being unable to speak volubly today. The honourable gentleman knows that is not a point of order. It is up to the Minister to answer the debate however the Minister wishes to do so. He is perfectly in order. Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have taken numerous interventions already, and I would stress the point of a debate is actually being there to take part in it. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, these are the reasons why our labour market is outperforming many other developed countries. More people have moved into work in the UK since 2010 than in France, Spain, Ireland, Netherlands, Austria and Norway combined. We are at record levels of employment, and once fully rolled out, universal credit will support another 200,000 people into work and helping those already in work to increase their hours. But we do not want people to just have any job, Madam Deputy Speaker. We want people to have good jobs, jobs where they're able to progress, and universal credit will enable this, whilst providing an economic benefit of £8 billion a year to our economy and saving the Exchequer over £3 billion annually. But that is not job done, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know as well as anyone the importance of supporting people into work, particularly vulnerable groups. And that is why we have worked hard to create a safety net that not only supports you when you fall on hard times, but gives you a hand up. And this is vital, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are spending over £55 billion this year to support disabled people and those with health conditions. This is more than any Labour government. Disability benefit spending will be higher every year to 2023 than it was in 2010. Under universal credit, disabled claimants who cannot work will receive an average £100 more each month than under the legacy system. So we are supporting those who have worked their whole lives and paid into our social security and now deserve to enjoy their retirement. We created the triple lock on state pensions, which has increased the amount of the basic state pension to almost £1,600 more than it was in 2010. And we are further protecting the poorest pensioners through pension credit. All this means, Madam Deputy Speaker, in total we spend more than £120 billion on benefits for pensioners in this country. And as a result, pensioner poverty is now close to historic lows, which is where we want to keep it. Now, I will now turn, Madam Deputy Speaker, to some of the points that have been made in the debate. The Honourable Lady for Wirral South raised the point around WASPI. Now, this government has introduced transitional arrangements costing £1.1 billion. This concession reduced the proposed increase in state pension age for over 450 men and women, and means that no woman will see her pension age change by more than 18 months relative to the 1995 Act timetable. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we reverse the state pension changes, which I think has already been pointed out by numerous honourable members earlier today, made under the previous Pensions Act, it would cost over £200 billion up to 2025-26. Now, in relation to the two-child policy, Madam Deputy Speaker, this policy ensures that parents in receipt of benefits face the same financial choices when deciding to grow their families. Now, as announced in January, we will no longer be extending the policy for new claimants for children born before April 2017. In terms of the benefit freeze, I've already made clear that we will end the freeze in 2020. In terms of universal credit, the principle is to have a simpler system with 6 benefits rolled into one. And in terms of supporting children, Madam Deputy Speaker, I play a role in the Early Years Interministerial Group, which was chaired by the former Leader of the House, which is looking at numerous options around cross-departmental work on supporting children. Now, the Honourable Lady for Oldham East and Saddleworth, I'm going to come to the points the Honourable Lady made. The Honourable Lady for Oldham East and Saddleworth raised a number of points. The government is spending £55 billion a year on benefits to support sick and disabled people. This year, 2019-20, we're spending on main disability benefits £9 billion higher than in 2010, with main disability benefits have been exempt from the benefits freeze. And I should say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that on UC, as I've pointed out already, around 1 million disabled households will receive an average of around £100 more per month. The Honourable Lady, my friend, the member for Truro and Falmouth, who's no longer in her place, I do agree with my honourable friend, and that's why she'll know that we're working with employers through our Disability Confidence Scheme, giving them the tools and advice to support staff with a disability or long-term health condition, and over 12,000 employers have now signed up. And I know that the Minister for Disabled People, my friend on the front bench, will pick up the ideas that she has suggested. And let me again, Madam Deputy Speaker, thank her for the work that she did when in the department. Now, the Honourable Lady made an intervention, the Honourable Lady for Edinburgh South West made an intervention in relation to the Scottish Child payment. Now, I understand the Scottish Government have laid out their plans to introduce an additional £10 per week payment for eligible children in Scotland. I should say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we welcome the overall commitment to tackle poverty, but note the challenge and look forward to understanding the impact of the payment in detail, and we will continue to work with the Scottish Government on the impact and introduction of that payment. And then the Honourable Gentleman for Adrian Shots, close, they were near. The pensions dashboard are digital interfaces that will allow individuals to see their pension savings online in one place to assist with their retirement planning. And I welcome the cross-party collaboration on the dashboard, and on the pensions bill we intend to bring forward legislation when parliamentary time allows. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are a government determined to help the most vulnerable, to help support them into work, support them to stay in work and support them when they can't work. We will continue to do this through all the support that this department offers, support that we will continue to assess and adjust by listening, learning and improving. I have met and visited a number of stakeholders, valuing and taking on their expert views. So we are always listening to colleagues, stakeholders and, most importantly, Madam Deputy Speaker, our constituents who we are here to serve and support.
Order. Order. The questions necessary to dispose of the motion stands over until 7 o'clock under Standing Order number 54.
Required to put the questions necessary to dispose of proceedings on the estimates set down for consideration this day. The first question is the motion relating to expenditure by the Department for International Development, which the House debated yesterday. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The next question is the motion relating to expenditure by the Department for Education, which the House debated yesterday. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The next question is the motion relating to expenditure by the Department for Work and Pensions, which was moved and debated earlier today. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 275. The noes to the left, 43.
Close. The ayes to the right, 275. The noes to the left, 43. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Bill ordered to be brought in upon the 5 motions in the name of Jessie Norman relating to estimates 2019 to 20. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
The Chairman of Ways and Means, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Elizabeth Truss, Robert Jenrick, John Glenn and myself, sir.
Thank you.
Look at this. Ministerial level nodding.
Supply and Appropriation Main Estimates number 3 bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Thank you. Order. We come now to motion number 4 on constitutional law. The Minister to move or whip on his or her behalf. Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that have been say aye. Aye. If the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We come now to, I think, motion number 5 on the community infrastructure levy. The Minister to move or whip?
I'd like to move.
Thank you. I remind the House that I have certified that it applies exclusively to England. The question is, as on the order papers, most of them say aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I think the double majority voting principle applies here. I say to the clerk at the table. Yes, I remind the House that this motion is subject to double majority voting, whole House and those representing constituencies in England. The question is agreed to, and we move on from that, no division being required, to the petition in the name of Mr. John Howell. Oh, very well.
Sorry to interrupt the presentation of the petition, but I'm just intrigued at this the double majority that was required there on a voice vote, and I wonder whether your ears are so skillfully attuned now that you can distinguish the ayes and noes between members representing seats north and south of the border.
Well, I didn't think any abnormal level of skill was required. It was evident to me that the motion has been agreed to. The question of whether an abnormal level of skill would have been available to me is A, hypothetical, and B, I think it would be immodest for me to answer the question in the affirmative. But as I treat of the matter as hypothetical and am not required to answer, and as I note from the beaming countenance of the honourable gentleman that he is teasing me, I take it in the spirit in which he has done so and proceed